Welcome to So Very Easy. My name is Laura, and when I saw this, it made me think of this. And together, I thought good old-fashioned Hollywood glamour, something a star would wear out about on the town. And this is going to be a quick project, and chances are you are not going to be able to find this in the store. And this is definitely Hollywood glamour. So let's make a winter shawl. The black looks like velvet, but the bonus is it's not velvet. Unlike velvet, this is two-sided, so we will not have to put a lining in it. It's soft and drapey. It's a very, very elegant fabric. It is Spa Cuddle double-sided, very easy to sew with. The fur is a Norwegian husky fur. Bonus is it's not a fur, it's also fabric, and they're by Shannon Fabrics. We're going to be able to get two from the fabric that we buy. So you're going to be able to keep one for yourself and give one as a gift. So this shawl is going to be very, very long. If you want, you can make it as short as you want or as long as you want. I'm going to start with 1.5 yards, and that's going to wrap that shawl from your shoulders and almost hit the ground, so it's going to be very elegant. The fabric is 60 inches wide, and you've got that 1.5 yards. What you need to do is just cut it in half all the way down the center. So you're going to end up with a 30-inch piece, and it can be 54 inches or whatever you decide your length is going to be. So you will have two from that fabric. All four sides need to be rounded off. Now I put both sides together so I can do two at the same time. And you need to get something to draw a circle. If you get something very small, you're only going to have a tiny little curve. What you want is a nice big curve. So the bigger the circle, the better. Just match up your seams and then cut off this piece. And when you take the ends off, you see you have this nice round corner. That's all the cutting you're going to need for the black Spa Cuddle. The next will be cutting your fur. And to cut your fur, you will need an X-Acto knife. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this fur and we're going to sew it all the way around that wrap. So what we need to do is cut long pieces and then sew them together. Now it's important that you cut your strips going along the selvage because you want the fur going all in the same direction. If you cut it along the width, the fur is going to want to stick up instead of fall down. So what you need to do is cut all the way along the selvage. A good measurement is 6 inches. Take your 6-inch ruler and draw a line along the fabric. And I'm going to do that all the way. Now, if you're going to use 1.5 yards of the black, I would recommend 1.25 yards. And I'm going to draw the lines all the way down the selvage, and I'm going to have the entire thing lined up. And when the cutting lines are done, draw some lines throughout the fabric. Choose one measurement and draw the lines. Just use whatever ruler you have so you don't have to count, but they're all going to be the same. And those lines are going to be lines that you're going to use way at the end. It has nothing to do with the beginning stages, but they're going to come in handy at the end. So I'm just going to do those lines all the way down. So I have the long cutting lines, and then these are just the placement lines. To cut them, just take your X-Acto knife and at the very tops, cut away from you. And just cut through the end of the fabric. You don't have to push all the way through. You just need that top layer. Once you have your beginning slits done, you're going to be able to cut all the way down. So what you're going to do is you're going to hold the top of your fabric. You're going to cut with the blade. Make sure you have a surface that you can cut on. And you're going to be able to start in that hole that you started and then just cut down. And you can hold it as you go along and cut. The fabric will separate. So by cutting just that top layer, you haven't cut a lot of the fur, so you need to cut all of the strips. And there you go. And as I go along, I'm going to just take my hands and just take off any of the loose fur. Once they're cut, we need to sew all of the strips together. So we're going to have one really, really long strip of the fur. Sewing them together, you must make sure that you keep the fur going in the same direction. If you try to match them up in the opposite direction, the fur is going to fight with each other. I would recommend a stretch needle. Now you can use anything that's a little bit heavier, like a 7511 or a 9014. And an all-purpose polyester thread is going to be fine. To sew the two layers together, I am going to have the fur going in the same direction. And in the seams, you need to trim off just a little bit of the fur. Because if you try to put all the layers together, you're going to have a big bump here. So we want it smooth so that you can't see any seams at all. So I'm going to use a little pair of snips, and I'm going to snip off approximately a 1/4 inch right along that edge of the fabric. If you just put your scissors in and follow that, you are going to be able to cut off some of that fur. And it doesn't have to be super close. You just want to cut off a little bit of the bulk. And you're going to do that to both of those short ends. Do not cut more than what your seam allowance is going to be. Now I have two edges with a little bit of a haircut, and when I sandwich them together, it's going to create less bulk right at that seam. Match up the edge and match up the edge that you cut, and just keep the fur tucked inside. And I would highly recommend a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That gives lots of room for that fur to be tucked in, and it's going to lay nice and flat. I would recommend using any foot that is quite wide. By doing that, it's going to help compress the fabric as you're sewing that 1/2 inch seam. You are going to need to change your stitch length. Instead of having something very small, you're going to need to make it a little bit bigger. So I have a nice big seam, and the end here has already been trimmed off for me. And I like to take a toothbrush, and I'm just going to brush it. And that's going to press it for you. And it's going to stay nice and flat, and any leftovers I'm getting in the brush. And when you turn it over, you do not see where that seam is. Now sew all of the pieces together, so you're going to have one long piece. Now we're going to sew the long strips of fur onto the cuddle. So the fur is coming down in this direction because that is the direction that you're going to be sewing. And when you flip it over, you're going to be able to match up those edges. And start a good distance away from that end, because we're going to match up and stitch that end closed when we've gone all the way around. And just take the fabric, match up the edges. I have a nice big seam allowance, and my stitch length is nice and big out of 4. And as I stitch, I'm going to take that fur and I'm going to comb it or push it inside. You will not need to pull or push the fabric. The machine will be able to take it on its own, as long as it's not pulling down tight here. So you're just going to have to let the machine take it by giving it some slack. And the machine will just take it. Do a couple inches and then tuck the fur back in, matching up the edges. Now when you come to this curve that you cut, you're going to need to dimple the fabric so that it lays flat when you get to the edge. You're going to want to dimple the fabric in 2 places around that curve. And it really doesn't matter where, just as long as you have 2 dimples. And to make a dimple, it's going to be very easy. Stitch down until you get to the area you want to make that dimple. And just take that fabric and pinch it so you have a little dimple right there, or a little pinch. Tuck in whatever you can and just stitch over top of that lump, nice and slow, and continue sewing around that curve. Go a little ways and then do another dimple. So I'm going to tuck the fur in, pinch up the fabric, and I'm not pinching the black, I'm just pinching the fur. So the black is flat at the bottom and I have a little dimple right there. And nice and slow over that little lump. And you're going to continue tucking this fur in and stitching all the way around. So you have those 4 curves that you're going to have 2 dimples on each curve. And stop when you have a nice big piece coming to the end, because we're going to join up the 2 ends. So we've started the stitching here. We've ended the stitching here. We need to match up these edges so that it can be continuous. Lay the fur down and just move a piece out of your way. So this is exactly how you would be sewing it. This is the top piece, and lie it down. And draw that mark. Now you need to have a seam allowance, so you need to add a little bit. So whatever your seam allowance is, you need to add it 2 times. So if that was 1 seam allowance, that would be a second. And draw your line. Now you need to cut that piece off. Don't cut it on your black. You're going to be able to match up those seams again. We're going to trim off just like we did before. With the 2 edges pinned together, the machine can stitch right over. And if you go slow, you can actually go right over those pins. And that edge is that edge we need to give a little comb. Now we're going to be able to finish sewing that seam, and we will have 1 continuous piece. And by tucking that fur in as you sew, all of those edges are going to come right out. Now we need to take care of the dimples at the corner. And right where you've done the dimples, on the opposite side, you need to make another dimple and just sew that by hand. You only need to stitch a little bit. Then you're going to take the needle and put it right to the very end of that little loop and pull it into that seam. So what you've done is you've crushed all of that together and tie it off. I now am going to want to take this raw edge and stitch it along this edge so that that seam allowance is tucked inside. And that's where those pencil lines are going to come in handy, because you're going to be able to match them up as you go along so that that keeps your fabric straight and not twisted. Use 2 strands of thread tied in the end, and it's going to give you nice strong thread. And I've just used all-purpose thread again. Now I'm using green so that you can see it. What you're going to want to do is put that needle right through into that seam on the one side. The next thing is to stitch up into the top. And because I started with my line, I'm going to continue with that line. And I'm going to put that needle in 1/4 inch from the top. The next thing you're going to do is take another bite right along that seam. And be careful not to twist your threads. Then you're going to go back up to the top again. And take another little piece. Follow that seam, take a stitch. So what you're doing is you're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You're going to hit that line of stitching that you did and 1/4 inch all the way. Then I'm going to be able to pull those threads tight, and that seam allowance is going to stay inside. So you just pull them tight. I've taken a stitch onto the one side, take a stitch on the other, stitch on the fur, stitch on the seam along that black. Do a couple of stitches and pull it tight. Now if you have any of that long piece left over, you can make a little scarf with it and match the fur going in the same direction. Really easy to sew if you have your machine going in the same direction as the nap. So you're going to sew one side, flip it over, and sew the other, and the machine is always going to be following that nap line. Because it's not a long piece, you can actually tuck in all of those fibers and pin it before you get to the machine. Now you can just sew this together and just leave one end open. Clip the two little ends and turn it right side out. And let the fur go in its natural position. And then you're going to fold the fur back and just close that up. So you now have an additional little scarf. And when the hand stitching is all done, you have a nice, elegant, very Hollywood style wrap done. You have a nice length in the back, and in the front it's nice and long. So however long you buy your fabric is going to be the length of the wrap. And if you've had some leftover fabric to make that little collar, you have a beautiful little collar to match. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.